Hello everyone! Today I'm going to be doing my May wrap-up. And I have read, I think, 9 books in the month of May, and then I have one book that I read in June that I'm going to talk about just because it was the last book in a series that I had already started. Without further ado, let's jump into this. The first 2 books I read were Chain of Iron and Chain of Thorns by Cassandra Clare. Now, I'm not going to talk much about these books just because I do have a discussion video up for Chain of Thorns. I will link that down below. I've talked about it enough already. Safe to say, though, that this is probably, actually it is, my least favorite series in the Shadowhunter world. So, yeah, I was just very disappointed in the characters. The plot was just way too predictable. And I felt like there just could have been, in this amount of pages, there just could have been so much more done to develop the characters. The plot just could have been more, I don't know how to phrase it. It just felt like everything was way too predictable and everything could have been worked in a way where I didn't see half the things coming. Chain of Thorns, though, was my favorite book. I mean, that's not saying much because I really didn't like the first 2 books at all, but I just like the fact that all the relationships had to wrap up in this book, and I didn't have to deal much with the teen drama and angst and ridiculous miscommunication issues. So yeah, links down below if you want to know my more spoilery thoughts. I mainly just talk about Chain of Thorns and just give a quick, overview of my feelings for the other 2 books. The next book I read was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I have heard so many great things about this book and Circe's, and it fell flat for me. Oh, I didn't say the ratings for Chain of Iron. Chain of Iron was like, I think, a 3 stars. Chain of Thorns was like a 3.5 stars. This, if I'm remembering correctly, was a 2 stars. This is a book that follows Achilles' best friend slash lover, Peleus, I think is his name, Patroclus. His name is Patroclus. Hoi. And this takes place pretty much from their childhood, like the moment they're born, all the way to the Trojan War, and then throughout the Trojan War and the end that they met during that war. If you know anything about the Trojan War or Achilles' story in general, you know the exact plot of this book. And I think that's where it fell flat for me. It's like, I know exactly what's going to happen, every step that happens to get there. It's basically you get a more personal viewpoint from a character that took, that took part in the war, which is nice, but because of that, we know everything that's going to happen. And the way this is written, I don't really form that much of an emotional attachment, so I didn't really care. I will admit that I did tear up at the end because of Patroclus, but that is only because I'm a really emotional person and I cry a lot. So that was more me than the story. I will be reading Circe's because I've heard it's better, and I also know less about that story, or I should say I read that story several times, but I can never remember it for the life of me. My expectations aren't high, but I am hopeful. Next I read Kismet Connect, and I'm not even going to attempt to say the author's name. I hated this book. I made a discussion video for this book. You guys can watch it if you don't mind spoilers. I couldn't stay spoiler free talking about this book. I tried for like 10 straight minutes to try to form a coherent sentence that didn't just outright spoil something for the book. So I'm not going to try. This book comes out on the 13th of this month. If you are interested in reading a story about Indian Americans, this and star charts and stuff, this may be right up your alley. I really don't like star charts to begin with, but I had high hopes for this, and I went into it like really expecting to love it. I can't like these characters. The characters are horrible, and the plot is like so, it reads like a first draft. The plot is just, it reads like a first draft. Everything is just in shambles, basically. Everything that happened could have still happened, but happened in a better way. And I wanted school to be more inclusive in this since it's their senior year, and we get nothing of their senior year basically. So that was disappointing. And yeah, I actually, this is the first book that I have written in, that I have highlighted, that I have tabbed the heck out of, and just not cared at all. Usually I don't like to do that because I don't like defacing books. I didn't care when it came to this one. I really didn't. My library said they won't take this since it's written in, so I guess it's sitting on my shelf until somebody else wants it. These next 3 books I read, I had already had the urge to reread them for like a month before I read them, but after reading Chain of Iron and Chain of Thorns, I was 2 books behind on my Goodreads reading challenge of reading 100 books because they're so long and I wasn't enjoying them, so it took forever for me to like pick them up once I put them down. So I read the Illuminae trilogy by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. It sounds weird saying it the other way, but I love Illuminae. Gemina is my favorite, and Obsidio isn't as bad as I remember. This is actually my 5th reread of Illuminae, my 4th of Gemina, and my 3rd of Obsidio. So I really love these books. I love, love, love the audiobooks for them, and pretty much all of my tabs are good things. Just like favorite moments. My favorite moments are pretty much the video analysis sections. I just love them, and I love the narrator for that. This is like watching a movie in your head. Like most readers, I assume, just based off, people I've talked to, can picture everything that happens in their head. This one with the audiobook, it's presented to you in a way that instead of watching a movie at home, I'm in the IMAX theater just getting the full experience, and I love it. So yeah, if you haven't read this trilogy, go check it out. The next 3 books I read, I had high expectations for, and they flopped. I already read the Legend trilogy by Marie Lu. Loved it. I was in the hospital at the time, and I wish I'd brought more books because I finished Legend in like a day. Same with Prodigy, and then Champion, I think, was a day as well. So I read those faster than I read The Hunger Games, which is, really unexpected. So I had high expectations for The Young Elites by Marie Lu, and boy did they flop. I hated these books so much. I finished them, and the only reason I finished them is because they were so fast-paced. They had like a dystopian pacing, but they're fantasy. The first thing that was wrong with this series is that this is a fantasy series, but the world building is just very poorly done. I knew very little about this world, and it felt like it was a very expansive world that had so much into it, but we just got to see none of it. Then you have the characters. Oh my gosh, these characters had no personality, were non-existent. You read this first book. I didn't even tell you what any of these books were about. I am so sorry. Well, for various reasons. Some of them you should already know. They've been out for such a long time. This series, I guess I should go back to Illuminae. The Illuminae series. I'm not even going to attempt to summarize Illuminae. Just go look it up on Goodreads and get a basic summary of it, because seriously, I tried to summarize this in my pen pal and I just couldn't without spoiling something. So I'm sorry that I can't tell you more about this book if you haven't read it. It's sci-fi, it's amazing, and each book has different main characters, but they all weave into the overarching plot. So you see them in the other books. Like this book has Katie and Ezra. You see Katie and Ezra in every single book. In Gemina, you get 2 new main characters, and then you see them in Obsidio. And then Obsidio has their own main characters, and of course you see them in that book, obviously. Just if you like sci-fi, I think you'll really love these books. Hell, at the time of reading these, I didn't like sci-fi, and I fell in love with these books. So, Young Elites is a world where people caught this blood fever, and those who survived the blood fever came back, which are usually just young people, like little kids. They come back being marked with like different, like maybe tattoos, hair color, eye color, and the like. And they are known as the Marked, or Malfecto. I don't know if I'm saying it right. That's just how it said in the audiobook. Most of the Marked, I don't think it's ever specified that all of the Marked have powers, but the majority of the Marked that we see have powers. This book, the first book, follows our main character Adelina as she escapes her father and his ruthlessness and is subsequently imprisoned and then rescued and then trained to be a young elite. You know, one of those that has like the most important of powers. Because even with teenagers, we have to be political with this. This book, this series banks on or builds up on this betrayal of her friends that happens in the first book. You can't even call these people friends, and you can't call it a betrayal. The entire thing is just so weakly done. Like, we didn't get any actual character development or personality from these characters. The most I know about these characters are their looks, their powers, and their names. I know none of their likes, their dislikes. I don't know how they've interacted with the main character. I don't know any of that stuff. And then all of a sudden, she's the one that does everything in the wrong and expects them to just forgive her for it because, you know, she had a good reason when really she didn't. And that betrayal that is so weak to begin with pushes into these two books and is what's driving the main character's ambitions or motives, whatever you want to call it. And I get why it's happening. I'm not going to spoil it, but I get why it's kind of twisted in her mind. But at the same time, it is still very weak. And I think it could have been done in a better way. And I can't really go into that either without spoiling something. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read the series and wants to go into the series. I think The Rose Society would have been my favorite just because Maginot, is that his name? I kind of liked his character, and I did like how things ended in Midnight Star. I saw it coming a mile away, but it was still a nice way to end the trilogy overall. And it's also something that I haven't seen anyone else do in a book, young adult or adult. Which, that's not to say it hasn't happened, that's just saying I haven't read a book that's done it. Yeah, I read these books. This was the book that I read in June. I finished it in a single day, and I just wanted to talk about it here so I wouldn't have to talk about it next month, honestly. So these are all the books that I read in May, and I'm gonna be completely honest, it was a very disappointing month. I was expecting more. But that is it for this video. I gotta get to work. I will talk to you guys next time. Bye!